All right, welcome everyone to today's episode of Is It Prophecy here on Israel National Radio, Root Sheva, and the show is syndicated as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in Messiah Hour with Ari Lewis and check out a lot of shows that we have done, Rabbi Ken Spiro, Dr. Gerald Schroeder, Rabbi Yosef Mizrahi, and you can subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Also, you can email me at messiahhour@gmail.com. A very tough week, it's a sad week for the Jewish people. Especially everyone knows about what happened on Friday of last week, the terror attack in France where 4 Jews were murdered. They were buried on Tuesday. And here to talk about that is Messiah Hour and Is It Prophecy correspondent Shira Nussdorf. Shira, welcome to the program.
Hi, Ari. It's always nice to talk to you. Unfortunately, we have something not so nice to talk about this week.
Right, certainly not. So the terror attack was, ironically, some people said not anti-Semitically motivated, but clearly it was, and you found out a scoop that the terrorists were actually targeting something besides the Jewish supermarket.
Well, listen, Ari, before we, talk about that, you just hit a point that's it makes me really appreciate the fact that we do have this opportunity to speak here on our Shavuos or on the Messiah Hour. And that's that we're independent journalists that are really trying to get to the bottom of the heart of the matter. And we saw this week that CNN, after a kosher supermarket was attacked on Erev Shabbos, specifically targeted to murder innocent Jews, CNN actually said that they weren't sure that it was an anti-Semitic attack because it wasn't particularly in a Jewish neighborhood. All right, that's like saying, I'm from New York, and if God forbid, a supermarket on the Upper West Side that was a kosher supermarket was attacked, I guess one could say that because New York isn't exclusively Jewish, that it's not biased. But if a person goes into a Jewish supermarket looking for Jews, I'd say that's pretty anti-Semitic. And it just really goes to show that, time and time again, we're seeing biased media try and slant things in a way that excuses anti-Semitic behavior. And thank you for the opportunity of giving me and all the French people who I spoke to this week a real opportunity to tell their side of the story. So I really appreciate that.
Well, it's like a small, very, very small thing that I could do. I mean, this is a terrible situation. And the 4 Jews that were murdered in France were buried in Jerusalem, as I mentioned, on Tuesday. You were at the funeral, and I just want to read the 4 names. May they rest in peace and their merit protect us all. Yohan Cohen, Yoav Atabab, Francois Michael Sada, and Philip Braham. And if I pronounce those names incorrectly, I apologize about that. Now, you were at the funeral, and the people there was an idea of this is terrible and what are we going to do about it, or was just sadness of mourning? What happened? Tell us what the feeling was like at the funeral.
Well, the funeral was surprisingly not the darkest thing I've ever seen. People were very optimistic in terms of thinking that perhaps now maybe the rest of the French Jews would come on home. People were talking about making Aliyah. They looked at this tragedy as something that was terrible. The men who were killed were there shopping for Shabbat, so obviously being Jewish and Shomer Shabbat was something that was important to them. And the Jews who attended, or rather the people from all over the world, came to show support, which is something that upon speaking with French Jews earlier in the week, they didn't feel. I spoke all week long to various members of the French Jewish community, and what they told me was when the original reports came in with Charlie Hebdo, people were shocked. The whole country of France was at arms with a terror alert. The citizens of Paris were under siege for 3 days. People didn't know what was happening next. And the world at large came out to support the Charlie Hebdo victims because they felt connected to this idea of freedom of speech, wherein the terrorists said that, one of the main reasons why they came and attacked this newspaper for actually a second time was because they didn't like this idea that these cartoonists, not even soldiers by any means, these cartoonists were drawing caricatures of the mob, just as they draw caricatures of Jewish people or the Pope or presidential leaders, whoever it is. And we saw at the Golden Globes all kinds of celebrities and George Clooney or whoever holding up the Je suis Charlie signs, and 3.7 million French citizens came out and took to the square to show their support. And yet, when the attack on the Jewish supermarket happened on Friday, just a few days later, it was nothing like that for supporting the victims and the families who had suffered those losses. Of course, people were moved by the fact that there was a Muslim man that helped and hid Jews in the ice box in the freezer, and people saw the images of the six linked chains of hands of people trying to keep warm. We saw images of a woman holding a baby to keep them warm, and all that was, people really were moved by that, but there certainly was not the same amount of support that it got when it was just media. And as much as we'd like to say, you and I, myself as journalists, that we should be happy that if freedom of speech is jeopardized, that people would come and rally to that level. As a Jew, I was devastated upon hearing what the French people were saying is something that is not exclusively of this week, but a sentiment they feel in their home country of France all the time, Ari. These people told me this week about the levels of anti-Semitism they feel on a daily basis. And they explained to me that France itself is what it considers to be a secular country, meaning you're not allowed to wear outward clothing of religious nature. So one of the things that the terrorists objected to was the fact that women can't wear full-body burqas. And I can understand that, because as I spoke to people this week, Jewish boys aren't allowed to wear kippots. And, I wouldn't want to necessarily live in a country which it was against the law for me to dress like a religious person that I am. But I certainly wouldn't go and murder innocent people as a result of it, or say that whoever paid French taxes was as equally guilty of oppressing my people. And so when we see the reaction that people have when they feel that their religious rights are not considered, it's understandable that somebody should be angry. But from my understanding of what the Jews that I spoke to this week said was that these militant Islamists are constantly attacking their freedom, and yet when somebody questions their right to have religious expression, that's not something that they're allowed to tolerate, so it was quite disturbing what I heard this week.
Again, this is a Prophecy on Israel National Radio, Route 7. The show is syndicated as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in Messiah Hour with Ari Lewis and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Of course, email messiahhour@gmail.com. Shira, we were talking about the idea of making Aliyah for France, the Jews from France, and we saw that in the week since the attack, 2,000 people have signed up for Jewish Agency information sessions in France. I want to know if that's the answer. Is that the answer to deal with this type of terrorism, is that the Jews just have to get out of there and come back to Israel? Is there any other option?
Well, I'll tell you two different points I've heard on that all week long. People were talking about, is that caving into terrorism? Is that showing terrorists that if you murder innocent Jews, then you get your wish, the Jews will leave? People talked about the fact that it reminded them of the pre-Holocaust days of the pogroms, when Jews in Europe felt at danger at all times and started to flee. So some people said that, to stay, including, I believe, our president said, and our president is not Obama. Clearly, as he didn't even go to support any of this. I don't know where he was this week, but he surely wasn't dealing in a way that was sensitive to the loss of life. But a lot of people said, we need to maintain Jewish life in Europe. On the other hand, some people that I spoke to said it's not even about fighting there. It doesn't matter what people in Europe think about us, we really need to protect our safety. And people spoke about the fact that this has been going on since 2003 in terms of an increased anti-Semitism from what they perceive as Islamic Muslims. I spoke to a man who had made Aliyah 4 months ago, Jean-Charles, and you mentioned about services in France. He told me that he didn't know the correct procedures in terms of trying to make Aliyah from France. There is no nefesh b'nefesh the way you and I enjoyed when we made Aliyah. And so the idea of French people, these 2,000 or whoever it is trying to make it, it's really important that they do find out how to do that in case that's what they want to do, is to come to make Aliyah in Israel. And I spoke with a woman named Jennifer who helps create services, and I spoke to her friend Isaac, who told me about all different programs that French people have. And sometimes they make Aliyah in 6 families at a time, like they'll organize that, or they have associations where by trade, if you're a dentist, if you're a doctor, they help organize that so that when you come over here, you can still maintain your licensing. However, since Jean-Charles didn't know about them 4 months ago, and he said his sister was in the middle of making Aliyah now, and she had never heard of these things, I've heard from a lot of French people that I spoke to, they just don't know that these services exist. And that's something that's really special, I guess, hopefully with this show or the continuation of these type of discussions, that people really need to know that there are services and how they can connect and plug in or try and help build them.
Yes, for sure, and hopefully there'll be more services to help out these victims and their families. Now, before we go back to Fira, I want to talk about the rally. There was a rally that Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, went to. Also Abbas, which was definitely eerie. I want to get your thoughts on that and the other leaders. What did you think about that particular rally? And as you mentioned, President Obama did not attend that one, but there was Bibi Netanyahu and there was Abbas. I want to know what you thought about the French inviting Abbas to attend that rally.
It's not just that they invited him to attend. From what I heard was that when Netanyahu said he was going to go, the French were very hostile towards him, saying they didn't want him there. And then when they found out that he was going anyway, well, they said, okay, well, if you're going, then we have to have a boss anyway. And then they tried to put them near enough to each other to be able to take a photo op. You know, and that sort of thing is like, it's really trying to stick their nose into our business and force a dialogue that's much further standing than just somebody else's photo opportunity to make yourself look like the hero and the good guy. And even from what the French people themselves said about the French government, they don't perceive the French government as any type of good guy. They told me that the fact that now there's an increase of police armed guards in front of the school is just lip service. A lot of people spoke about the fact that they had constantly been petitioning the French government for additional support and help and protection, and that it never seemed to be important. They talked about the fact that the French media constantly portrays Israel in a negative light, and I even spoke to a non-Jewish woman who said that up until she came and visited Israel, she had heard such negative things about Jewish people, and that she was quite surprised at what she found. Even in fact, that when she sees here Arabs walking around in full covered burqa, she thought that Arabs here have more freedom than they do in her home country. So, you know, a rally is, according to the people who live in France, something that may be very nice for the world who is upset at this moment and wants to take immediate action to sort of make themselves feel better about maybe not reacting before. But this is what the French people are saying, is they want to see real progress. They want to see social change. They want to see something way more than just a photo op. And even the fact that these people who committed this heinous act were wanted terrorists on a watch list, and yet they were admitted into the country, even from Syria or wherever they came to or have now escaped. So a lot of people would like to see actual implementation of laws that protect Jewish people.
And it was also interesting when you take a look at the rallies, how you talked about they try to make almost a political moment out of what happened by trying to get Abbas and Netanyahu together, which was certainly strange. Now, we were talking about French Aliyah, about Jews moving to Israel. I want to know if the people at the funeral, if they agree with that idea, because it's talked a lot about in the press, and it's talked a lot among people in general. But the people at the funeral, was that the feeling that Aliyah was the answer?
I wish I could say that they thought that it would actually motivate the rest of the French people to come. But just like in this week's Parsha, when Moshe Rabbeinu goes to the Jewish people and says, God has heard your cries. We know that you've been groaning for all this time. Its time has come, and I'm going to help get you out. And I'm going to Paro. I'm going to plead on your behalf. And you see, this week's Parsha 7 Makkos later, we're still pleading. So the French people that I spoke to said, as much as it seems like it's the right thing to do, it's very hard to get people to make change, even when they know that the place where they were in is really not for them. Likewise, during the 1940s pre-Holocaust era, when people saw Hitler coming, it was difficult for them to leave, even though they knew there was not much of a life left in Europe for the Jews. So what's going to get us on the wings of eagles? I don't know, Ari, but this week's Parsha and the Haftorah talk about that this will and is going to be our homeland. And I saw something interesting on Facebook that said this is the only land that, after 3,000 years still maintains its language, its culture, its people, its original name. And it will take a miracle for every Jew to come home, but that's why we are praying for it.
Again, this is a Prophecy on Israel National Radio, Root Sheva, and the show is syndicated as the Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube, type in Messiah Hour with Ari Lewis, and you can email me, messiahhour@gmail.com. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is free to do so. Now, Shira, we talked about this a few days ago, the concept that these Jews, they grew up in France and lived in France, but they're buried in Israel. Talk about the importance of being buried in Israel, and also the Israeli government paid for that funeral, which is unique. You don't see a lot of countries that would do something like that, but Israel did. So talk a bit about that aspect.
I just came now from the Shiva call of Philip Baram, and I must tell you, his family was so strong. They were actually comforting me. I came there with a week's list of sorrow and messages of love and hope, and all I heard from them was how amazing they felt and supported to be here, that there was no second thought as to where they would want their beloved husband and father to be buried. And his niece actually told me something that was quite beautiful. She said that he had lost a baby 4 years ago. He had a 2-year-old that was sick for 10 months and had gone blind. And now his widow at the funeral said that at least the baby is now with Abba. And rather than think, how could all these terrible things happen to me, she had even greater sense of Emunah, and she was comforting people. And the family was just, overwhelmed by the amount of love and support that they got from the Jewish people. And they felt so connected and so at peace with this tragic act that happened. And, you pointed out in the beginning of the show that it was meant for somewhere else. They've actually found out that these, this couple that was the main conduit for this to happen in the supermarket were on their way to a Chabad school where they were planning to attack and murder hundreds of innocent children, and that they experienced some type of minor traffic accident, which is why they killed that traffic cop. They had a traffic accident, and so they got scared and they killed this cop and abandoned the car and left all the artillery. And so, there's minor and major miracles that happened all this way that protected, God forbid, even greater human life. So these 4 people that died in effect because the terrorists were planning to kill hundreds, and they didn't know of another Jewish place besides the Chabad supermarket. So in God's mercy and His Rahmanis, we see that these people who died, as tragic as it was, their family accepts their fate and looks as an opportunity to strengthen themselves. And I asked them, what's your Shabbos going to be? This is their first Shabbos now without their father. And the family explained to me that their plan was to take the wife, the widow Valerie, and go to different family members' house with her and her children, and they're here this Shabbos to be with the Jewish people, and that's the choice that they made. And it's something that it's a testament to us that's how Am Yisrael responds to tragedy. And unfortunately, we've had so many tragedies this summer, and we're well versed in how it is that we defend, protect, and care for each other to help us through this difficult time.
Okay, now what's going to happen in a few minutes, we're going to take a break, and on the other side of the break, we're going to hear interviews that Shira did at the funeral. Shira, give us a brief description of what people are going to hear in the second half of the program.
Well, in the second half of the program, we have interviews from French people who have just made Aliyah, French people who help the people who want to make Aliyah, Americans who are reacting to what they see from the perspective of trying to support their French brothers and sisters, people at the funeral speaking about their first reactions, being scared when they first heard that this was happening, if it was their family that were murdered and killed, and even an IDF soldier who was a French immigrant who is very proud of the fact that he has come here and he has served his country in 3 different wars, and that even at the Shiva call, the people who we're there to go and visit are there to comfort us. So in the second half is a beautiful selection of all different type of people, and unfortunately all with the same message, that they don't feel optimistic about Jewish life in France, that all of them think that this is a better place for us to be, and that hopefully when we read the Parsha, the Shabbos, that we can see God's mercy and the hopefulness that it has, that, it always gets worse before it gets better, and that if this is the type of thing that will inspire other people to make Aliyah, then maybe it wasn't all in vain. And again, the thing is, it's not a wake-up call for the people in France. It's really a wake-up call for us. All right, it's a wake-up call for us and Jewish people all over the world to know that we really have to be here. And we have to make this country a place where it's welcoming and strong enough for the rest of Am Yisrael to come and make Aliyah. So hopefully there will be an increase of people coming, and not because they're running, but because they feel the love and unity that we try and hold here.
All right, so on the other side of this break, you'll hear interviews Shira did at the funeral. This is a Prophecy on Israel National Radio, Arutz Sheva. The show is syndicated as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube, type in Messiah Hour with Ari Lewis, and again, email messiahhour@gmail.com. We'll be right back after this break.